Denise Langley was a married mother of two. Blake Rayner was her 20-year-old neighbor. What began as a secret affair quickly spiraled into a deadly obsession, ending in a brutal murder that shook an entire community. How did a quiet housewife become a cold-blooded killer? And what pushed a young man into the crosshairs of someone he thought he could trust? Watch the full documentary to uncover the chilling truth behind Housewife's affair with neighbor's son ends in murder. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories every day. In the summer of 2017, the town of Brookhaven was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted to escape chaos. Quiet streets, well-kept lawns, and neighbors who offered casseroles during tough times. It had the reputation of being safe, predictable, and, frankly, boring. That's how most residents liked it. Crime was rare, and drama was even rarer. The homes in the Maplewood cul-de-sac all looked the same. Beige vinyl siding, flower beds near the porch, and two-car garages filled with bicycles and lawn tools. Nothing stood out. Nothing ever really changed. At the far end of the cul-de-sac lived Denise Langley. She was 39, a stay-at-home mom with two kids in middle school. Her husband, Thomas Langley, worked long hours in construction, often leaving before sunrise and returning after dark. To the neighbors, the Langleys were a standard suburban family. Denise waved during school drop-offs, kept her yard tidy, and brought homemade cookies to block parties. She rarely raised her voice. She didn't miss appointments. She was dependable. But Denise Langley was deeply unhappy. Her marriage, once full of affection and long conversations, had withered into routine. Most evenings were spent apart, Thomas in the garage or passed out on the couch, Denise alone in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. The intimacy had faded years ago. Their lives had become parallel tracks that rarely touched. Denise didn't talk about her feelings. She didn't have anyone to talk to. Her friends had drifted away over time, and she filled her days with laundry, grocery runs, and scrolling through social media. She would sometimes linger by the window, sipping coffee, watching the street, trying to feel something other than invisible. That summer, something changed. The house next door, a blue-sided home that had been empty for nearly a year, became occupied again. The Rayner family returned after living away for some time. With them came their son, Blake. He was 20 years old, tall and lean, with sun-bleached hair and a casual, easy smile. He'd left college in his second year for reasons no one talked about and had moved back in with his parents while figuring things out. Blake was immediately noticed. The neighborhood kids looked up to him like a big brother, and the mothers, especially the younger ones, found excuses to greet him. Denise met him one afternoon when she was unloading groceries. He offered to carry the bags inside, and she let him. That small interaction led to more. He mowed her lawn when her mower broke, offered to repaint her fence, and helped fix a jammed door in her garage. He was helpful without being overbearing, polite without being awkward. He always smiled, always made eye contact, and always seemed happy to be around her. At first, Denise thought of him as just a kind neighbor. A sweet kid. But over the next few weeks, something began to stir inside her, a kind of attention she hadn't felt in years. Blake complimented her appearance. He lingered in conversation. He noticed when she changed her hair or wore something new. It was subtle but deliberate. And Denise, so starved for affection, began craving those moments more and more. By July, Blake had become a regular fixture in her life. He'd stop by most mornings after his jog, shirt damp with sweat, asking if she needed anything before heading back to bed. Denise began dressing differently, not overtly, but in ways that made her feel noticed. Lipstick, fitted tops, perfume. She began buying snacks she knew he liked. She rearranged her schedule to match his availability. Her children were still at day camp during the day, and Thomas worked long hours. The window of opportunity was wide open. There was no lightning strike moment when their relationship crossed the line. It happened gradually, lingering touches, shared glances, private jokes. And then one day, it didn't stop at a smile or a hand on the shoulder. It became physical. Denise didn't resist. In fact, she welcomed it. She told herself she deserved to feel desired. Blake made her feel alive again, like she wasn't just someone's wife or mother. She began associating him with freedom. But that freedom came with danger. Denise started taking risks she never would have imagined. Sneaking Blake into her home during the day, deleting text threads, lying to her husband about errands that never happened. The more she fed the secret, the more she needed it. She felt young again, reckless, in control. What she didn't realize, or refused to admit, was that she wasn't the one holding the reins. Blake was 20. He lacked direction, consistency, and maturity. To him, the affair was thrilling, but temporary. He enjoyed the attention and the access, but he wasn't emotionally invested. Denise, on the other hand, was falling deeper by the day. She began to imagine a future with him, one where she left her husband and started fresh. The idea seemed crazy at first. But the more time she spent with Blake, the less crazy it seemed. By the end of August, the entire dynamic of the cul-de-sac had shifted. No one could see it, but something rotten had begun to grow behind those beige walls. The neighbors still waved. The kids still played in the sprinklers. But within the Langley house, a secret was pulsing like a time bomb, waiting for the moment it would finally explode. By late August, the affair between Denise Langley and Blake Rayner had evolved from secret flirtation into a full-blown obsession. What had started as stolen glances and casual encounters had become a daily routine. The relationship now operated like a shadow life, one that Denise carefully managed alongside her public role as a housewife and mother. With her children in school and Thomas working overtime to meet construction deadlines, she had hours of privacy. Time she used to be with Blake. Denise had never experienced anything like it. With Blake, she felt wanted. He brought back a version of herself she thought was long gone, youthful, confident, bold. She began investing emotionally in the relationship far more than she realized. It wasn't just about sex anymore. She convinced herself it was love. She told herself they had something real. Something worth destroying her marriage for. The problem was, Blake didn't feel the same way. To him, Denise was a temporary thrill. An older woman who was attentive, generous, and predictable. He liked the risk. He liked the power. And he liked the material benefits that came with it. Denise had started giving him money, at first for small things like gas and groceries, then more extravagant gifts like expensive headphones, clothing, and even access to one of Thomas's credit cards. Blake didn't question it. He used it freely. In Denise's eyes, the gifts were a form of loyalty. A way to make him stay. But slowly, Blake began pulling away. He stopped texting first. He avoided her calls. He made excuses not to come over. When they did meet, the encounters were rushed and hollow. Denise noticed the change, but refused to accept it. She blamed his stress, his parents, even his age. Anything but the truth, that he was losing interest. By mid-September, Blake had rekindled a casual relationship with his ex-girlfriend, a local waitress named Jada. They were seen together at a diner downtown. Denise found out from a mutual neighbor and confronted Blake over text, demanding answers. Blake responded coldly, telling her it was none of her business and that she was becoming too intense. That message shattered something inside her. Denise was no longer just in love. She was spiraling. She began watching his house from her window, noting when his bedroom light turned off, who pulled into the driveway, when he left in the mornings. Her world began revolving around his movements. She would take walks past his house under the guise of exercise, hoping to catch a glimpse of him or of Jada. Every ignored text, every unanswered call felt like a betrayal. Her mood swung violently. Some days she begged Blake to talk to her. Other days she threatened to tell his parents or her husband. Blake told her to calm down. He said they were never serious. That it had all just been fun. Denise couldn't handle it. She started showing up unannounced at places he hung out, the park, the corner store, even outside the diner where Jada worked. She tried to appear casual, but her presence was alarming. Neighbors began noticing. One friend told Thomas she'd seen Denise talking to a young man behind the grocery store, looking distressed. Thomas laughed it off, thinking maybe she was lost or mistaken for someone else. He didn't press. Denise began documenting everything, keeping a journal of her thoughts, writing about Blake as if they were in a great, forbidden romance. She became convinced Jada was turning Blake against her. She imagined conversations, threats, even imagined that Blake had told Jada everything. She feared exposure, but her fear was buried beneath a louder emotion, rage. She started fantasizing about confronting Jada, about making Blake understand what he was giving up. In her mind, she was the victim. She had given him her time, her trust, her body, and now he was discarding her like garbage. The shame morphed into fury. She began drinking during the day, something she had never done before. Glasses of wine turned into bottles. Her texts to Blake became erratic, ranging from desperate pleas to veiled threats. He stopped responding entirely. It was around this time that Denise started searching online for disturbing topics: how to erase phone data, how to destroy surveillance footage, and how long it takes for someone to bleed out from a neck wound. These searches were made late at night, while her family slept upstairs. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated a woman completely detached from the person she used to be. One day, she drove past Blake's house and saw Jada's car in the driveway. That was the final straw. Denise didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind filled with images she couldn't control, images of confrontation, of blood, of finality. She convinced herself that Blake had never truly cared for her, that he had used her, that if she couldn't have him, no one else should. From that moment forward, Denise's mind crossed into a space that could no longer be reasoned with. The affair, once a lifeline to her lost youth and identity, had turned into a trap. And now, cornered by rejection and humiliation, Denise wasn't thinking about consequences. She was thinking about revenge. The people in Brookhaven continued living their quiet lives, unaware of the storm brewing just a few doors down. Kids played outside. Leaves turned orange. And inside the Langley home, Denise Langley planned the unthinkable. On the night of November 3, 2017, the air in Brookhaven was crisp and silent. The sky was clear, and most homes on the cul-de-sac had already turned off their porch lights. It was the kind of night when nothing unusual was expected to happen. But sometime around 10:40 p.m., a frantic 911 call came from the Rayner residence. The voice on the other end belonged to Mrs. Rayner, who had just returned home with her husband from an out-of-state trip. They had discovered their son, Blake, lying motionless on his bedroom floor. Blood was pooled beneath his body, and a broken picture frame lay beside him. He had been stabbed multiple times. There were no signs of forced entry. The house wasn't ransacked. Nothing appeared stolen. But one thing was clear: this was not an accident. When police arrived, they quickly secured the scene. Blake had been stabbed 12 times, mostly in the neck and chest. His body was cold. Rigor mortis had set in, suggesting he had been dead for several hours before his parents found him. There was no sign of a struggle in the room, no overturned furniture or scattered objects. A forensic sweep revealed that Blake was likely attacked while lying on his bed. The angle and depth of the wounds indicated that the killer had the element of surprise. More chillingly, Blake's hands had no defensive wounds. He never saw it coming. Investigators started canvassing the neighborhood, questioning anyone who might have seen or heard something. Most residents were asleep or out of town. The Rayners had security cameras installed, but oddly enough, the footage from the night of the murder was missing. The system had been wiped, an action that would have required specific knowledge of how it worked. Police grew suspicious. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was targeted, personal. As detectives dug into Blake's life, a clearer picture emerged. He had recently reconnected with his ex-girlfriend, Jada, and they had been spending time together. But there was also another woman in his life, someone older, married, and deeply unstable. Her name came up more than once during interviews. Denise Langley. Neighbors recalled seeing Blake and Denise together frequently over the summer. One woman even admitted she thought they were having an affair, but brushed it off as gossip. Others remembered how Denise had been acting strangely in recent weeks, distant, emotional, and often seen lingering near the Rayner property at odd hours. Police brought Denise in for questioning. She appeared calm at first but visibly tensed when asked about her relationship with Blake. She denied any romantic involvement and claimed she hadn't seen him in weeks. When asked where she was on the evening of November 3rd, she said she had stayed home alone, watching TV and folding laundry. Her husband, Thomas, was working an overnight shift and confirmed he wasn't home that night. But Denise's story lacked detail. She couldn't remember what she had watched on TV or the exact time she went to bed. Investigators obtained a warrant to search her home and vehicle. What they found was damning. In the trunk of Denise's car, they discovered a few drops of blood on the carpet. Preliminary testing confirmed the blood matched Blake's DNA. In the garage freezer, wrapped in a trash bag beneath bags of frozen vegetables, police recovered a kitchen knife with traces of blood and skin tissue still on the blade. Forensics would later determine it was the murder weapon. Denise had attempted to clean it, but not well enough. In her bedroom, detectives found a handwritten journal filled with emotional ramblings about Blake, pages describing their affair, her jealousy over Jada, and her heartbreak over being ignored. One entry, dated October 31st, read, "If he thinks he can humiliate me and walk away like nothing happened, he's wrong. He doesn't get to win. Not this time." Police also reviewed her phone records and discovered several deleted text threads between Denise and Blake. Some messages showed her begging him to talk to her. Others were dark and accusatory. A few hinted at revenge. Forensic experts were able to retrieve fragments of these messages from her device, enough to paint a chilling timeline. Blake had stopped responding 2 days before his death. Denise had sent her final message the morning of November 3rd. It read simply, "We'll talk soon. One way or another." When confronted with the evidence, Denise began to unravel. At first, she maintained her innocence, saying she had no idea how the knife got into her freezer or why Blake's blood was in her car. But under pressure, her story changed. She claimed she had gone to Blake's house that night only to talk. According to her version, he became angry and pushed her, and in the chaos, she stabbed him in self-defense. But the autopsy told a different story. Blake was asleep when the attack began. He was stabbed repeatedly with no indication that he ever woke up or fought back. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of panic. It was premeditated. Investigators concluded that Denise had entered the Rayner home while Blake was sleeping. She likely used the spare key that Blake had once given her during the height of their affair. She had waited until his parents were out of town, knowing he'd be alone. And when she found him, unaware and unarmed, she attacked swiftly and brutally. After killing him, she wiped down surfaces, deleted surveillance footage, and tried to clean herself up before returning home. The pieces fit together too cleanly to ignore. Denise Langley was arrested for the murder of Blake Rayner, charged with first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. Her arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Many struggled to comprehend how the woman they knew, the polite, helpful mother of two, could have committed such a violent act. But behind her composed exterior had lived years of emotional neglect, loneliness, and a festering obsession that finally turned deadly. The truth had been hiding in plain sight. And now, it had spilled out in the form of a young man's blood and a shattered illusion of suburban normalcy. The news of Denise Langley's arrest sent a wave of disbelief through Brookhaven. Neighbors who once exchanged casual greetings with her now whispered in hushed tones, avoiding eye contact when passing her house. The woman they had seen handing out Halloween candy just days earlier was now being led away in handcuffs, accused of brutally murdering the boy next door. The Langley house, once a symbol of suburban order, was now surrounded by flashing lights, crime scene tape, and news vans. The illusion had been shattered. But for the investigators, the work was far from over. With Denise in custody, they turned their attention to building a case solid enough to hold up in court. They combed through every detail: timelines, phone records, text messages, surveillance footage, and digital evidence. Forensic teams traced the knife found in Denise's freezer back to a kitchen set registered in her home. Blood splatter patterns in Blake's room aligned with the angle and type of wounds, supporting the theory that he had been attacked while sleeping. Even more damning was the discovery of Blake's fingerprints on the freezer lid, indicating he may have opened it at some point, perhaps during the earlier months of the affair, when he had free access to Denise's home. The prosecution built a narrative that was hard to refute. Denise, a lonely and emotionally vulnerable housewife, had developed an unhealthy fixation on a younger man. When he began pulling away, she unraveled. Driven by rejection, humiliation, and fear of being exposed, she decided to eliminate the source of her pain. It wasn't a heat-of-the-moment killing. It was planned, calculated. She waited until his parents were out of town. She knew he'd be alone. She brought gloves, wiped his phone clean, deleted the home security footage, and disposed of the weapon in a way she thought would never be discovered. But she made mistakes. Emotional ones. She left traces, messages, journal entries, and forensic evidence that told a story she could no longer deny. Denise's defense team knew the odds were against them. But they attempted to shift the narrative. They argued that Denise was emotionally manipulated by Blake, that the power dynamics of their relationship weren't as clear-cut as the prosecution claimed. They painted her as vulnerable, desperate for affection, and ultimately discarded like garbage. They emphasized her clean criminal record, her role as a devoted mother, and the mental toll the affair had taken on her. They didn't deny she had been at Blake's house the night of his death, but they insisted the killing had not been premeditated. They called it an impulsive act committed during a breakdown, a crime of emotion, not intention. But Denise's journal told a different story. One entry stood out to jurors and prosecutors alike. Dated October 29th, it read, "He thinks he's in control. But he forgets how much I know. What I've seen. What I've done for him. One day, he'll understand what happens when you use people and walk away." For the jury, that wasn't grief or heartbreak. That was rage. Dangerous, calculated rage. The trial drew national attention. News outlets described it as a suburban affair turned deadly. Cameras captured every moment Denise entered the courthouse, her expression stoic, her appearance neatly composed. But inside the courtroom, the calm exterior began to unravel. Witnesses testified to the sudden change in Denise's behavior before the murder. One neighbor recalled seeing her sitting alone in her car at odd hours, staring at the Rayner house. Another had overheard her yelling on the phone in her backyard. Even Thomas Langley, testifying under subpoena, admitted that his wife had become distant, irritable, and secretive in the final weeks before Blake's death. Perhaps the most emotional testimony came from Jada, Blake's ex-girlfriend. She described Blake's growing discomfort with Denise in the final days before he died. How he had confided in her that Denise was becoming possessive, even threatening. He had been planning to tell his parents about the affair and cut off contact completely. But he never got the chance. After 3 weeks of trial and nearly 6 hours of jury deliberation, the verdict was delivered. Guilty. Denise Langley was convicted of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. She showed no visible emotion as the sentence was read aloud, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her attorney quietly placed a hand on her shoulder. She nodded but said nothing. In the weeks that followed, the aftermath spread like ripples through the community. Thomas filed for divorce immediately and moved in with his sister. The Langley children were removed from the home and placed in the custody of their grandparents, far away from Brookhaven. Blake's parents sold their house within the month and left the state entirely, unable to bear living in the shadow of their son's final moments. The cul-de-sac that once symbolized safety and normalcy now bore the stain of tragedy. The beige house with the trimmed lawn and flower boxes became known for something far darker than family life. It became the place where a secret affair had turned into an obsession, and where that obsession had ended in blood. People continued their routines. Lawns were still mowed. Mail was still delivered. But the feeling was never the same. A quiet dread had taken root, the unsettling knowledge that beneath the surface of everyday smiles and polite waves, someone had been unraveling, unnoticed. And no one had seen it coming until it was far too late. The courtroom was nearly empty the morning Denise Langley was sentenced. A few reporters sat in the back, scribbling notes, but the buzz of media attention had already started to fade. The trial was over, the verdict delivered. For most of Brookhaven, the nightmare had ended. But for the families left behind, the real reckoning had only just begun. Denise stood before the judge in a pale gray jumpsuit, her hands cuffed tightly in front of her. Her once polished appearance had withered. The neatly curled hair and careful makeup were gone. Her face was gaunt, her eyes vacant. She didn't cry when the judge handed down her sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. She didn't look at anyone in the courtroom. Not the jury, not her defense attorney, not even her own family. If she felt anything, she didn't show it. Outside the courthouse, the sky was overcast and dull. News crews, tired of waiting for another headline, packed up their cameras. The community had gotten its answer. Justice, in the eyes of the law, had been served. But justice couldn't undo what had been lost. Blake Rayner was 20 years old. He had plans, even if they weren't always clear. He had flaws, immaturity, recklessness, but he had also been full of life. His death had devastated his parents, who had returned home from their trip only to discover their son's lifeless body on his bedroom floor. They moved out of Brookhaven within weeks of the verdict. The house remained empty for months, its "for sale" sign collecting rust. Rumors swirled about what had happened inside. Some potential buyers walked out mid-tour once they learned about the murder. Others never called back. Eventually, the house sold at a steep discount to a couple from out of town, unaware of the home's history. Denise's family was left shattered. Her husband, Thomas, filed for divorce the day after the sentencing. He hadn't attended most of the trial, only appearing once to testify under subpoena. He said little in court, but afterward, he told reporters that the woman who had committed this crime was not the woman he had married. He said he didn't know who she had become. Their children, both teenagers, were placed in the custody of their maternal grandparents. They transferred to new schools. Counselors were brought in to help them process the trauma of their mother's actions. Neither child returned to Brookhaven. The Langley home, once filled with routine and normalcy, became a silent shell. In the months following the trial, the case lingered in online forums and true crime blogs. Commenters speculated about Denise's mental state, debated whether she was truly evil or just broken. Some blamed Blake, accusing him of leading her on. Others pointed to Denise's years of loneliness and isolation. But regardless of opinion, one fact remained: a young man was dead, and a mother of two was in prison for life. Inside the correctional facility where Denise was sent, she kept to herself. She didn't join group activities. She didn't call her children. In her first year of incarceration, she was placed under psychological observation after refusing food for several days. When asked by a prison therapist if she regretted what she'd done, she said only, "I didn't expect it to end this way." She never elaborated. Her journal, introduced as evidence during the trial, remained locked in a file at the prosecutor's office. Pages filled with obsessive thoughts and shifting emotions provided a chilling window into her state of mind in the weeks before the murder. The entries stopped abruptly 3 days before Blake's death. Prosecutors believe she stopped writing because she had already made up her mind. The final entry was brief and cryptic: "It will be quiet soon." Community leaders in Brookhaven tried to move forward. A local counselor held a forum on domestic boundaries and mental health. Parents attended, some out of curiosity, others out of fear. Schools introduced workshops about digital safety and emotional resilience. But the whispers never really stopped. People spoke less openly about the murder as time passed, but the memory lingered. The house where Denise had lived was eventually rented out. Tenants came and went. None stayed long. Years later, a journalist revisiting the case contacted Denise for an interview. She declined. She had not spoken to the media since her arrest. The journalist spoke instead with Blake's mother, who had started a small scholarship fund in her son's name. "We don't want people to forget what happened," she said. "But we also want people to remember who he was before this. Not just the boy in the headlines. He was more than a story." The story of Denise Langley and Blake Rayner remained one of Brookhaven's darkest chapters. On the surface, it was a tale of betrayal, obsession, and murder. But deeper down, it was a cautionary tale about loneliness, blurred boundaries, and what can happen when people lose sight of reality. Denise had started as a quiet housewife, living a life that seemed perfectly ordinary. Blake had been a young man still figuring himself out. Neither of them expected their lives to collide in a way that would end with one in a grave and the other behind bars. What began as a secret thrill in the shadows of suburban life turned into a violent unraveling. And while the neighborhood would eventually move on, the legacy of that crime would remain etched into its foundation, a silent warning that even in the most peaceful of places, danger can grow in silence, fed by emotion, and hidden behind drawn curtains.